Okay, so now we've talked about what's in here, we need to prioritize things. So I think the big idea is historically important. And one of the things that most of you have probably done already is gotten through your social studies methods class. And if you have, great. If you haven't, I'm going to just tell you a few things about social studies that are important. We usually think of social studies as learning about things that happened in the past and memorizing names, dates, and places on a map. Um, and at least that's how a lot of people experience it. Some people find it interesting. Some people find it incredibly boring. Um, Social studies. If you're going to be a social studies teacher, the question you have to ask yourself is, well, why am I doing this? What's the point of this? How does this help my kids? Why do we think the stuff that we're teaching matters? And when you look at social studies, it's really trying to describe the human condition and what it means to be a person living with other people in this world. And there are several different strands of social studies. One is the historical stuff. What are the important events that kind of shaped our history and will guide our future? One is economics, and it's really about why people do what they do for different incentives and how systems of exchange drive everything. One is about human motivation and human nature. One is about geography and how people live in the land that they occupy and how that shapes their values, beliefs, and customs and culture. And so when we're thinking about this lesson from those perspectives, what we're really trying to do is think about, well, what do they need to know and why does it matter? Now, if we kind of go into what we're trying to set up, if this is American history, we want to prioritize things that happened that impact the Americas. Columbus, definitely important. Um, when we think about Ferdinand and Isabella, uh, maybe because they were Catholic. And when you think about the impact of Catholicism on South America, Central America, the United States, um, it's huge. And if there was a different religion in place, it would have been a different story. Um, so maybe that's important. We have Amerigo Vespucci that they talk about. It seems somewhat important. Not sure at what level of cognition yet. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then Ferdinand Magellan, another important person. Now, as we think about this conflict between Portugal and Spain and the Pope getting involved and, a church authority drawing this line that guides these countries, it does say something about what was important about the role of the Catholic Church. And maybe we want to keep that in there. It's in the content, so we want to think about it. We have the term circumnavigate. Not sure if that really matters here. We also have the Columbian Exchange. And from a historical significance perspective, this is, the main thing. And the effects that they're going to learn about are the big thing. Now, they're not dealt with in this particular lesson, but they are historically significant. Now, it's not that important if we look at what was brought from the Americas over to Europe. What's much more important is what was brought from Europe over to the Americas. And if I can just zoom in on this for a second, um, when we look at these items, we have cattle and the cattle industry. And if you think about how that shapes the U.S. economy, it's huge. Citrus fruits, important, but not super important. Diseases, incredibly important because smallpox killed, somewhere between 75 and 95% of different native populations. So that is a huge thing that shaped history. Grains and issues of starvation and production and processed foods and all that stuff reaching into today. Another kind of thing. Horses, kind of a thing. Think of cowboy culture and things like that. But sugarcane is probably the other biggie. If you think of the two biggest, it's probably disease and sugarcane. And sugarcane, I say that because of the slave trade. And when we think about plantation economies and um, the incentives to produce as much sugar as you can for as little as cost as you can, that opens the door for slavery and totally changes um, the course of history and leads to, you know, some of the worst things that humanity has done. So when we think about what we want to take away from this lesson, what do I want my students to really understand? That's always kind of the question. And when we think about the main lesson goal, it's kind of akin to the big idea, but we want to make sure we specify what we mean by it so we get detailed and what level of cognition. Now, I'm going to suggest that lesson goals should always be at least at the comprehension or application level. And in this case, the big idea, I think, is pretty close to this. But I think that we need to add a few things about what happened. So Columbus's voyages led to new exchanges between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. We can probably change that. Columbus's voyages led to the Columbian Exchange, which had strong negative and positive impacts on Europe, Africa, and the Americas. And then what we're going to do is we're going to break that down into sub-goals about what we mean by that. And in the next video, I will talk about what we mean by that.